In the history of Canadian aviation, there are few figures as legendary or revered as the bush pilot. Flying deep into Canada's remote northern regions where runways are non-existent, temperatures can drop as low as minus 50 degrees Celsius, and the nearest repair facilities are often hundreds of kilometers away, bush pilots must possess a rare combination of daring, flying skill, navigational instinct, and mechanical ingenuity. This make-do frontier spirit has existed since the very earliest days of Canadian bush flying, and there are few better examples than a 1921 incident during the very first flight into the deep north. This is the remarkable story of Vic, René, and the Moose Glue Propeller. As with so many developments in the region, the arrival of aviation in northern Canada was spurred by the quest for natural resources. In 1920, geologist Theodore A. Link discovered oil on Bear Island on the Mackenzie River, 132 kilometers from the Arctic Circle in the Northwest Territories. The presence of oil in the area had been known for some time. Local indigenous people had long used deposits of bitumen to waterproof their canoes, while natural oil seeps were reported in 1789 by explorers Sir Alexander Mackenzie, namesake of the Mackenzie River. Link's survey, however, confirmed that the oil deposits were plentiful and high quality enough to warrant further development, and his employer, Imperial Oil, quickly staked a claim to the site. But there was a small problem. The site, dubbed Norman Wells after the nearby settlement of Fort Norman, lay more than 1,400 kilometers from the end of the railway at Peace River, Alberta, a journey of 8 weeks by dog sled. If Norman Wells was to be surveyed before the spring thaw, and before competitors could reach the site first, a faster mode of transportation was needed. Charles E. Taylor, the head of Imperial Oil's development program, found a solution in the still young technology of aviation. For this historic first flight into the high Arctic, Taylor selected one of the most cutting-edge aircraft of the day, the Junkers Larsen JL-6, an American-built version of the German Junkers F-13. Introduced in 1919, the F-13 was the world's first commercially successful all-metal monoplane transport, featuring Hugo Junker's revolutionary corrugated aluminium construction method. Powered by a 300-kilowatt Liberty L-12 engine, the JL-6 could carry up to 4 passengers or 700 kilograms of cargo, had a maximum speed of 173 kilometers per hour, and could fly up to 1,400 kilometers without refueling. Unusually, while the passengers flew in an enclosed heated cabin, the pilots sat in a semi-open cockpit with just a small windscreen to protect them from the elements. Taylor ordered 2 aircraft, registered GCADP and GCADQ, directly from the Junkers Larsen Corporation in New York, and dispatched 2 pilots, George Gorman and Wilfred Watt May, to deliver them. Both men were experienced flyers with sterling military records, May being a triple ace who had famously survived the final battle of Manfred von Richthofen, the legendary Red Baron, in April 1918. Gorman and May, along with air engineers Pete Derbyshire, John Allen, Dick Myers, and Ernest Boole, took off from New York in late November, the midwinter flight having been specifically chosen to test the aircraft's resistance to extreme cold, and headed north towards Edmonton. Though the flight was largely uneventful, on takeoff from Brandon, Manitoba, Gorman caught his tail skid on a wire fence and was forced to stay behind to effect repairs. May arrived in Edmonton on January 5, 1921, with Gorman following on the 25th. Shortly thereafter, the aircraft were officially christened by Mrs. A.M. McQueen, wife of Imperial Oil's vice president. The aircraft also received official nicknames, with GCADP being dubbed Vic after Charles Taylor's daughter Victoria, and GCADQ René after his secretary. After being fitted with skis and modified carburetors for winter flying, Vic and René were ready to make their historic flight. At the controls were George Gorman and Elmer Fullerton, another seasoned pilot who had flown for the Royal Navy Air Service during the war. And accompanying Gorman and Fullerton on the voyage were geologist and navigator W. Waddell, air engineers Pete Derbyshire and William Hill, and Royal Canadian Mounted Police Sergeant Hubert Thorne. He had actually just escorted murder suspect Albert Lebeau from Fort Providence to Edmonton and was hitching a ride back to his regular post at Fort Simpson. The 2 aircraft set off from Edmonton on March 24, 1921, heading north toward the railhead at Peace River. For the sake of safety, it was decided that the aircraft should fly together in formation, while an emergency fuel cache was established on the Upper Hay River about halfway between Edmonton and Norman Wells. At Peace River, the group refueled and carried on towards Hay River, but a snowstorm forced them to put up at Fort Vermilion until the 27th. From there, they flew to Fort Providence, where they were once again waylaid by deep snow, and finally to Fort Simpson, arriving on March 30th. To the pilots' dismay, the ice on the Mackenzie River proved too rough for a safe landing, so they landed instead on an open field next to the settlement. That was when disaster struck. Shortly after landing, René broke through the thin crust of snow and pitched forward, damaging its right ski and shattering its wooden propeller. Not wanting a repeat of this incident, the team unloaded Vic of all necessary weight and flew her to a nearby Snye, or tributary of the Mackenzie River, where the ice was smoother. Here, however, they discovered the Vic's carburetor was badly clogged from the low-grade fuel they'd been using, and the decision was made to transfer Vic's right ski and propeller to René and to use the latter aircraft to carry on the mission. On April 3rd, the team was ready to carry on, and René, crewed by Gorman, Waddell, and Hill, taxied out onto the Snye. But shortly after takeoff, the aircraft suddenly stalled and crashed into the ice, shattering its propeller and damaging its landing gear. With no spares available, the team was stuck, stranded at Fort Simpson until the spring thaw and the ice breakup allowed spare parts to be sent up by steamboat from the south. The mission appeared to be a failure. But then, salvation arrived in the form of Philip Godsall and Walter Johnson, employees of the local Hudson's Bay Company trading post. Examining the aircraft's shattered propellers, Johnson, an experienced carpenter, came up with an outlandish scheme. Why not make a new one? The Imperial Oil team initially scoffed at the idea, but Johnson, convinced that, quote, "I've never seen a woodworking job I couldn't handle yet," decided to try out his plan anyway. As Elmer Fullerton later recalled, there was enough of the broken propeller available that could serve as a pattern from which templates could be made. We learned that the Catholic mission had a few oak slate boards 10 feet long and 7 inches wide, which were just about the size we needed to make a laminated propeller, except for being about 1 inch too narrow. The difficulty was solved by the eventual realization that by fanning the boards, they could get the additional width needed. To fix the boards together, Philip Godsall made glue by boiling moose hides, which the Catholic mission happened to have in abundance. Johnson clamped the boards and glued together using bolts, boat jacks, and whatever else he could find, and cured the assembly over a wood stove to form 2 solid laminated blocks. Then, using sheet metal guides formed from the original propeller, he carved the blocks into shape. To everyone's amazement, the improvised propellers worked perfectly, and within 3 weeks, Vic was ready to fly again. On April 15th, the Imperial Oil team climbed aboard and set off for Norman Wells. Thanks to Walter Johnson and Philip Godsall's frontier ingenuity, the mission was a success, and the first oil well in the Northwest Territories was soon brought into production. Meanwhile, Air Engineer Pete Derbyshire remained behind in Fort Simpson to complete repairs on René, just managing to set off on the last day before the spring thaw. The takeoff was dramatic, with the aircraft's skis throwing up fountains of meltwater, but Derbyshire made it into the air and landed safely at Peace River, 800 kilometers to the south. The 1921 flight to Norman Wells proved beyond a doubt the utility of aircraft for Arctic exploration and development, and helped open up northern Canada as never before. Today, the 2 moose-glued propellers reside in the collection of the Canadian Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa, humble testaments to the can-do spirit of that pioneering age of aviation. Thank you for watching.